Magnificent, graceful, and undeniably beautiful. The red kite. Just one of many raptors on tonight's Springwatch.
Hello and welcome to Springwatch 2021. It's Friday, the end of our second week, coming to you live from Wild Ken Hill here in the northwest of Norfolk. And our mission this year is to show you a vision for the future. So a bit later on in the programme we're going to be explaining why we've got all of these beautiful flowers here and the margins around this field. In fact, we've got some good stuff coming up tonight. A gem, a scientific gem about the nutritional value of aquatic insects, which could see you changing your diet. But first, what about our live cameras? What can we see at the moment here at Wild Ken Hill? Well, what about this? A roe deer nibbling, as they do, browsing. Is it on the bramble? They like to nibble bramble. It's having a little groom there. Yeah, bramble in the foreground by the looks of it. I like the roe deer of all of our deer species. If it deigns to show us its nose, they've got a lovely black button nose. Look at that. This one's molting, you can see there. I said it was molting the other day when I saw this one. I'm not entirely sure that's molt. It could be, I suppose. A bit late for that. Nibbling and browsing away on all of those fresh shoots. I was looking at the bramble the other day and it's so green, the tips of it. I bet that roe is having a lovely little supper of bramble.
What a start to the show, but I've got to say, what a difference today. Look at the weather.
I know.
Grey sky. We were in T-shirts yesterday, weren't we?
Well, not exactly. I wasn't.
T-shirts and shorts in the day, at least. Anyway, let's go straight to our selection of Nest cameras. Last 24 hours, we haven't had any drama. Pleased to say there's been no predation, there's been no hatching, and there's been no fledging. But we have got a real treat for you. We gave you 3 new nests yesterday, going to give you another one today. It's this one. It's a real stonker. It's the red kite. And here we go, we're going to it live now. And these chicks, these are chicks, can you believe it? I mean, they're pretty developed, aren't they? And they've just been fed. Just minutes ago, I actually saw the female come in and feed them. So now they're preening themselves. Let's have a look at where this nest is. It's in the woods, just on the edges of the fields. And then you can see the bird coming in. This is such a fantastic bird. It's got a wingspan of 5.5 foot, 175 centimetres. And as we saw, there are 3 chicks in that very sturdy nest. And look at that face with all that down around it. And then we pull out and we can see the chicks. And as we saw just a minute ago, they're very developed. Look at those feathers. I mean, they've got the colouring of the adult. We're extremely lucky to have red kite. This is not a stronghold for them in Norfolk. There's still a bit of a novelty. That adult looks absolutely sensational. It's the female that's feeding them in the first few weeks, and then the male will join in, and then they'll both do the hunting. But an absolutely great view of those kites. Those 3 will probably start fighting a little bit. There's a bit of sibling rivalry that goes on. They squabble a bit in the nest, so we'll probably see a little bit of that next week.
What a handsome bird.
Oh, I know.
I've forgotten how handsome the red kite is. They've got that sort of silver fox look to them, haven't they? Immaculately turned out. Really, really beautiful birds. Well, that's what we're up to here, but you've been out and about as well, in your gardens in some cases. Lizzie Horn has sent us this. She witnessed some bumblebees stealing nectar. Look, they're not sticking their tongues into the front of the flower and down into the nectary because they simply can't reach it. So what are they doing? Well, they're nectar robbing. They're making a hole at the base of the nectary and stealing the nectar. Now, we think that they might learn to do this by trial and error, or in some bumblebees that they actually achieve it through social learning, in that one bumblebee sees another one doing it, recognises it's advantageous, and then copies it, which is quite extraordinary. And of course, there's no benefit to the plant. It's not going to get pollinated. This is part of that arms race between plants and animals, and on this occasion, the animals are in the lead because they're nicking the nectar.
Curious behaviour. Here's something else that's a bit curious that John Walters sent us in. He noticed this in his pond. First of all, he noticed a female common toad laying white eggs. When they hatched, you saw these little white tadpoles, and you can see them amongst the ones we're more familiar with, those brown tadpoles. And as long as they survive, they will turn into white toads, and apparently it's not uncommon. Pretty cool.
I've never seen one.
Well, that's why I said apparently
I'd
not
love to see
uncommon.
an albino toad. I bet there's some folklore associated with albino toads. If there is, let us know. Good start here from Wild Ken Hill then with those kites. Absolutely stunning. But of course we aim to bring you wildlife from all over the UK, so I'm pleased to say that we can now go to Northern Ireland and see what Gillian's up to.
Yes, we have been filming right across Northern Ireland for the last couple of days, but today we're back here at Castle Espy, a wildfowl and wetland trust centre. But it's not all about birds here. The wardens here have been using camera traps to catch a glimpse of some of their more elusive residents, and by night. So this was filmed here on the reserve. This is an otter, absolutely beautiful animal. And it wasn't just one they saw the cubs as well. There they are, moving through under the cover of darkness. Absolutely beautiful things. They will have dispersed by now, but the adult otter has been seen quite regularly on the reserve, almost every single evening, just at nightfall. So of course we're going to make it our mission to try and film that animal while we're here.
And I'm up here at the wonderful Allerdale Wilderness Reserve up in the north of Scotland. 23,000 acres of wildlife paradise. So how are we going to kick off tonight? I'll tell you what, let's start with the pied wagtail version of Meals on Wheels. Now, we have a herd of red deer around us, and these deer inevitably attract insects, and a pied wagtail has learnt this and jumps on the backs, jumps on the velvet-covered antlers, and pecks away at all the insects on there. He'll go from stag to stag until he's finished. Does that every single day. And I bet when we've gone, he'll probably dial a pizza or something. Amazing bird, amazing bird. Now later on, I'm going to be taking you up onto the very high tops there to look at the wildlife.
I love that little pied wagtail. It's got itself a moving buffet, hasn't it? We've got our own pied wagtail nest here. Let's take a look at it. Here it is, it's in the barn, and you can see it's right up in the eaves there. And if we look in, if we can zoom in, the mother's on the chicks. So we can't see how many chicks there are, but when we last looked at this nest on Wednesday, we did see one chick hatch out. And as she gets off, you can see that there's one there. Shortly after that, another started to hatch. And this is a little bit comical. It gets the bit of shell stuck on its head like a helmet. Female comes back in and removes it. And then shortly after that, we know that another two hatched, but we never really managed to see right into the nest to see if the fifth one had as well. And it wasn't until today that we got a good glimpse and we could see that all of the 5 beaks were peeking out. So that's good news, but we have seen something that could be a little bit worrying because it's only the female that we've seen actually feeding those chicks. The male is around. Maybe he's just late to the party. Maybe he's not coming to actually feed the chicks yet, but I hope he does soon because 5 mouths is a lot to feed, isn't it?
And the temperature's dropped and there are less insects about, certainly at the moment, and maybe over the course of this weekend too. One male that has been in attendance regularly is our male kestrel, and we've been watching a live nest not too far from here actually, about 600 metres from where we're standing. But before we go live to that nest, have a look at this. The other afternoon we were watching the female on the nest. She got a bit fidgety and stepped onto the edge before flying out into the field. Now here she's not swooping down on prey, she's simply landing in the grass and she starts to run around. What's going on? Well, I watched kestrels doing this before, and they are probably after beetles, grasshoppers and that sort of thing. They have such a broad diet. I mean, yes, they like to focus on small mammals and small birds, but they will turn their beak to worms, invertebrates, even lizards, small snakes, those sorts of things too. And I think the ones just popped out, got fed up with those, you know, fidgety chicks in the nest and fancied a little bit of a grasshopper snack. But let's go live to the nest now. We've got 3 youngsters in there. We did have 5 eggs, and here you can see them. They're beginning to huddle up. The temperature has dropped a little bit here. They were panting yesterday. Today they're huddling, and they're in their second coat of down. They start off pure white. They're now grizzly grey. Not a lot of activity, but then that's not surprising, because at the moment it's simply about eating, resting and growing, and they've been getting plenty of food. Here the female has brought in a small bank vole. So this is a young bank vole. A youngster like this couldn't swallow an adult bank vole in one piece. I can tell you it took this one 2.5 minutes. We've all been there, haven't we? It's that last slice of pizza. You know, when you didn't want to share a pizza with your partner and you ordered a whole one for yourself, and then to prove a point you've just got to eat that last slice. Well, it gets it down. And then look here on the right, this one is beginning to learn to feed for itself, because obviously up until this point the female largely has been tearing up the food and giving it to them. Hasn't quite mastered it. It can pull at it with its beak, but it keeps tumbling onto its ankles. And here the female brings in a bird, and look, it's a grizzly streaky brown bird. How are we going to identify it? Look at its rear toenail. Very, very long indeed. Now there's a group of passerine birds that typically have these long rear toenails, and those are the ones that spend a lot of time running on the ground. They're there for balance. Things like the pipits and things like the skylark. And that bird was an adult skylark, a skylark that sadly is going to be singing no more.
And as you may remember, we introduced you to a skylark yesterday. And Chris, I have to tell you that apparently kestrels are the most popular nest that we've got at the moment on social media. But I think those kestrels may lose their place in the popularity pecking order if they've chowed our skylark. Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to go and look at the nest live to see if ours is still alive and with us. Let's have a look. Here we go. Let's zoom in. As we zoom in, I think there will be a communal sigh of relief, because our skylark is still alive. Although I have to say, the kestrels still did eat a skylark, but at least it's not the one that we're emotionally invested in. So our skylark lives another day, I'm pleased to say, and sitting on eggs.
I wouldn't mind betting that those kestrels actually hover over the skylarks and then plunge down to them whilst they're brooding or incubating their eggs, though. Because a skylark's quite a robust bird, and some kestrels are, well, they're not the toughest hunters. So I bet sneaky catching of skylarks is something that they might do. But enough of sneaky skylark catching. Let's head north, far north, to the Highlands of Scotland and see what Yolo Williams has got for us next.
Lovely to see all those birds of prey down there in Norfolk, especially the red kite. It reminds me of home. And we have got quite a few species up here as well, including 2 pairs of buzzards. And earlier this week, when we went out to check some of the many camera traps out and about, one that was in a birch woodland like this one, quite low down, the last thing I expected was a buzzard. But that is exactly what we saw on it. The buzzard looks as if it's caught, but it's not caught. I wonder if it's plunged down to try and rip off a bit of greenery to add to its nest. Buzzards do that, of course. But then we looked a little bit more carefully and we could see that they had something in its talons. Now that was over very quickly, so let's have a look at that again in more detail, and then we can zoom in and see if we can identify the prey in there. Here's the buzzard again. If you look carefully, you'll see something dark in its talon there. It's trying to carry off. And if we stop it, rewind and zoom in, you can see a little head and a beak there. So it's obviously a bird of some kind, a dark coloured bird. Now, what would that be? Well, at the moment, there are several small birds on the wing, recently fledged ones. We think it may well be a starling. there are plenty of starlings here, not just in and around the house. They're in the eaves, they're in some of the outbuildings, they're also in the woodland. Here's a youngster, you can tell by that huge yellow gape that it's got. Very vulnerable, of course, not very experienced at all at the moment, and it's just the kind of bird you'd expect a buzzard to grasp. I have to say, mind, I did go for a walk through the woods just about an hour ago. There were a lot of young song thrushes out there as well. So song thrush, starling, it could be either of those two. Now, if we're going to talk about camera traps, the camera trap queen has to be Kate McRae, Wildlife Kate. Big friend of the watches here, of course, and she has teamed up with Dennis Stretton and put up nest boxes in and around his home in Essex, and they put cameras on them. And one of them is on a kestrel nest box. They're hoping to capture the private life of the kestrel, much as we're doing on the watches, but what they got was quite unique and quite astounding. Now, I have to warn you, what you're about to see is quite graphic. This is the pair of buzzards, the pair of kestrels, sorry, perched up. That's the nest box with a camera on it. And it all started when the male kestrel was bringing food back to the 6 chicks, hotly pursued by a hobby. Both went straight into the nest box. The female kestrel came straight in, believing that her chicks were being attacked by the hobby. The male leaves and the battle ensues. Now, you've got to remember, the female kestrel, she doesn't leave that nest for long, and she's on call all the time because she's invested so much in those eggs, so much in those youngsters, that she is going to fight to protect them. The battle goes on. It's all wings, it's all talons, all beaks. The male is hanging around trying to get in, lands on the top. They're gripping each other, and they're well matched, these two, really well matched. A female kestrel weighs about 220 grams, male hobby about 180. So they're really well matched, battling away. But the female kestrel has the advantage because she is battling not just for herself, but she's battling for her youngsters as well. And eventually she kills that hobby. As I said, it's a difficult watch, but it is pretty unique. I've been watching wildlife for more than 50 years. I've never seen and I've never heard of anything like that ever before. And we spoke to Kate, and from the kestrel point of view, they're doing pretty well. They've got 6 chicks. Now, believe me, that female kestrel will not have got away from that unscathed. What a brave, brave mother she is. Now, how on earth do you follow that? Well, I'll tell you how, with the king of birds. The bird that I really wanted to see up here is the golden eagle. Haven't seen one yet, but earlier this year, this was filmed by local cameraman Norman Strachan. A golden eagle doing what golden eagles do, looking noble, looking regal. You can even see the golden head and nape there. It's using the wind hitting the valley side for lift. Now, that wingspan from tip to tip is over 7 feet. It's a huge bird. You see the head looking down, just scanning around there, looking for prey. Still time, got another week here. I'm still hoping I will see a golden eagle. Now, later on, I'll be taking you up onto the high tops in search of some wildlife that eagle was probably looking for as well. But he was looking for it for a very different reason. It's time to go over to Northern Ireland now and catch up with Gillian, who's trying to solve a bat mystery.
Yes, indeed. Bats are mysterious creatures. They're shrouded in mystery. But there is one species here that has surprised even the scientists. Nethusias's pipistrelles. There's a colony that has set up residence in Clotworthy House. It's the site that's managed by Antrim and Newtown Abbey Borough Council. And on Monday, we sent one of our camera operators to catch up with the research team over there. So this is the site, Clotworthy House. And you can see Dr. Emma Boston there. She's using a bat detector to monitor the colony. Now, the Nethusiases are roosting alongside other species, the soprano pipistrelles. And the device that she's using actually picks up the bats' echolocation calls as they set off on their foraging trips. And the calls are these very species-specific waveforms that she can use to actually ID the species using sound alone. And it's estimated that the roost currently has around 150 Nethusias's pips in that roost at the moment. Now, the bat detector allows you to ID the bats by listening out for them. But what do they actually look like, these Nethusius pips? Let's take a look. So they are beautiful little things here. This is the largest of 3 species of pipistrelles. And even so, the Nethusius can fit into a matchbox. It's as light as a 50p piece, so they're very demure little animals. And for one so small, these bats love to travel. In fact, I should say they need to travel. So let's take a look at where they go. So they spend the winter over here in Britain and southwestern Europe, but then they will head to northeastern Europe as well. That's where they head to breed in the spring. And this is an enormous journey for such tiny animals, 700, 800, 900 miles. In fact, there's one individual that was recorded on its winter migration heading from Latvia all the way down to Spain, and that journey was found to be 1,390 miles. Now let's put that into a little bit of context for you, because we have here a life-size cutout of a Nethusius pipistrelle. And you can see these are absolutely tiny little creatures, and isn't it amazing that they can do a journey of over 1,000 miles? So if they're meant to be taking their tiny little selves over to northeastern Europe to breed in the spring, what on earth are 150 of them doing over at Clotworthy House? And even more interesting, some of the females are pregnant, some are even lactating. So clearly they're breeding here. So why the change in behavior? Well, at Clotworthy House, their roost is very close to Loch Ness, the famous loch with the swarming flies. And this gives them really, really easy access as they leave their roost every night to go out and hunt for their food, the surplus food. And this, combined with the effects of climate change, means that these little bats no longer need to travel to breed. So the insects are part of the reason why this area is such a great draw and a breeding ground for this species. There are other things on the menu, however, that we might find a little less palatable, but are also a magnet for other species of insects.
Cows and horses chew the cud, the lush green grass providing them with spring sustenance, but mammals only absorb a fraction of the nutrients in the food they eat. The rest must come out. An invite for some small garden party guests as dinner is served. It's not the sound of a gong that signals supper, but the heady scent of fresh dung. Within a matter of minutes, the first diners arrive. Flies, like green bottles, waste no time in getting stuck in. There's no silver service at this table. For some, an outdoor buffet offers far more than a meal. It's a place to be seen. Yellow dung flies feed mainly on other insects, yet they're still attracted to dung, but for a completely different reason. Mating. A male takes up prime position, top of the table, and takes the opportunity to spring clean his compound eye. You have to look your best to attract the ladies after all. These amorous insects are some of the most abundant flies found on dung in the Northern Hemisphere, with cowpats being the perfect spot for speed dating. There's no flirting at this feast. The male just jumps on the first female he sees. But the others are also desperate to get the girl. Let the battle commence. The biggest and the boldest males usually get the female. Smaller males have to sit it out on the sidelines, watching and waiting for an opportunity. Amidst the chaos of the fighting, this sneaky sideliner has seen his chance and risks intercepting the female. their gamble pays off this time. After a successful mating, the male will guard the female until she's ready to lay her eggs inside the dung. The feisty flies may have skipped straight to dessert, but dung provides a main course for one of our other most important insects. Dung beetles use their specialised antennae to seek out fresh offerings. Britain has around 60 species, some with a preference for cow dung, others for sheep, but all are connoisseurs in recycling leftovers. They are heavy lifters with hefty appetites. When they get together, they work quickly to demolish a palatable pat. Unlike their African cousins, they don't roll their dung, but some will dwell inside whilst others burrow tunnels deep down. As they dig, they bury the dung, returning precious nutrients to the soil for plants to grow again. Their burrows also open up the dung to other detritivore diners, such as slugs. Like any dinner party, there are late arrivals, and this one is a predator. A ferocious and fast devil's coach horse beetle. It's likely slugs are on his menu. But there's a distraction. Another devil's coach horse. These ravenous rove beetles have no table manners when it comes to sharing their food. A dinner party is never a success without someone causing a scene. The perfect distraction for an escape. Dung is more than just a tantalising taster menu for insects. It's a vital resource. It provides nutrition for some, breeding grounds for others, and for those on the lookout for an easy meal, it's the epitome of field-to-fork dining.
Isn't it great? There's a whole ecosystem living its best life in a cowpat. And around here, of course, there's lots of dung for insects to choose from. They can have cow, you can have a bit of Exmoor pony or pig, all those grazers that they're using naturally in the farm. But it's not just dung that insects are making the most of this time of year. It's also the marshes, because in spring there's an eruption of thousands of little mini food parcels for all the aerial feeding birds to just feast on. But interestingly enough, for all our birds, the swifts and the swallows, it's not about the quantity of food, it's about the quality of food that they're eating.
It's that age-old dilemma, isn't it? Quantity versus quality. Remember when you were a kid, what did you want? You wanted quantity. You wanted a massive pile of chips. What was your mum saying? You need some nutritional intake there. And we're increasingly interested in our nutritional intake. We take all sorts of supplements in our diet, and one that we're interested in are highly unsaturated fatty acids, perhaps better known by one group of them as omega-3s. And omega-3s are really good for us. They help in the development of our brain, the development of our eyesight. They have anti-inflammatory qualities, and also they boost our immune system. So where do we get those essential omega-3 oils or fatty acids? Well, one place we can get them is from nuts, particularly oily nuts, things like walnuts. Chia seeds have lots of omega-3 in as well. Another source for those people who eat meat are fish, particularly things like salmon and mackerel. They're rich in these omega-3s, and they're not just good for you when you're developing, they're good for you as an adult as well.
And it might surprise you to know that they're also very good for birds, but where do they get them from? I mean, clearly they don't go to the supermarket and buy themselves a packet of nuts and a bit of mackerel. So what do they eat to get their omegas? Well, welcome to Packham and Strachan's Fresh Bug Market. And Chris, I've done a bit of shopping. I'm a swallow. I've done some shopping and I've got my little basket here.
Okay.
Let's find out what's good for me then.
Well, if you've been out shopping and you've got yourself a beetle here, then you haven't done too well, I'm afraid, Michaela. So they are very low. I'm going to put this on the chart here. Look, less omega on this side, more omega-3 on that side. So I'm afraid the beetle's quite low down. So you might catch a lot of beetles, but not going to be helping your youngsters.
Oh, OK. What about a fly? Would that
fly,
fare any
again,
better?
another terrestrial insect.
Oh.
And again, I'm afraid, quite low in omega-3s.
OK, butterfly.
Slightly better.
OK.
Slightly better for some reason, but again, you're not really hitting the mark. You're still on the lower side of the spectrum. So if you're a swallow that's swooping around over the fields here, catching these sorts of insects, you might be getting quantity, but maybe not the quality you need.
OK, I'm guessing that I might do a bit better with these aquatic ones.
Exactly.
So let's give the aquatic one to go. What about a dragonfly?
OK, if we go for dragonfly first, remember this is an animal which is both aquatic and terrestrial, because the larvae are aquatic, spending all of their time in the water, but the adults flying around above. So they're not bad. They pitch themselves in the middle here.
Mayfly?
Mayfly, here we are. Let's have the mayfly. Better still. And now we're getting into the realms of much higher quantities of these highly unsaturated fatty acids in the bodies of these insects. Stonefly, last of all, an absolute bonanza of these. So when you look at it here, what you see is that the aquatic insects have a lot more of these omega-3 oils. In fact, they have up to 10 times the number that the terrestrial insects have here. Now, why is that? Well, it's because these compounds are easily oxidised, and of course in water there's less ease of transport of oxygen, and therefore they are better preserved in the bodies of these animals than they are in the terrestrial insects. But do the birds know this? Do they actually go out and actively seek these aquatic insects? Well, we've been watching our nest. The whitethroats, the sedge warblers, here the whitethroat. Now, it's difficult to identify all of the things going into the bills because they've been crushed up, but that is undoubtedly an aquatic nymph that's gone into that young sedge warbler. Here, the whitethroat again, a mixture of inverts, but amongst them, we think we can see gnats. And here, look, there's no doubt about that. OK, it's middle range, it's a damselfly, but there is no doubt at all that they are feeding them aquatic insects. Do the chicks genuinely benefit as we do from these? Well, a study conducted in North America with a species that's very closely related to our barn swallow showed that the more aquatic insects fed to the young led to a much better success when it came to those young fledging from the nest. So it was working. There's no doubt at all. It's not calorific content, it's nutritional value that counts for these birds. And there's one other absolute gem when it comes to our swallows, and that is that they concentrate these highly unsaturated fatty acids, the omega-3s, in their pectoral muscles, and those are the large flight muscles that power their wings when they're migrating. So what about that? Those swallows are moving from one part of the planet to the other on the backs of the value of the nutritional intake they get from aquatic insects.
It really is fascinating stuff, isn't it? And of course those pectoral muscles need to be so fit and strong because, as Chris said, they do these incredible migrations to South Africa and back every year. So if we go to our live swallows, our chicks, let's really hope that they are being fed plenty of aquatic invertebrates, that they're getting their diet full of dragonflies, mayflies and stoneflies. They're looking pretty strong, Chris, and look, there's even a little bit of a wing flap there, so hopefully they are. But here's the astonishing thing, because if you remember, last week we were looking at the male and we noticed that he had a ring, and it took us a while to get the number. It's Z997668. Sent it off to the BTO. It was ringed on the 30th of August 2016 at Ashcar in Thornton in Norfolk, just a few kilometres away from here. So it's 5 years old, which is astonishing in itself because the average lifespan of a swallow is 2 years. So this is a real veteran that has gone to South Africa and back 5 times, which is astonishing. So I'm guessing, Chris, that that particular swallow ate a lot of aquatic invertebrates, and that's what's made it so strong and got it to that incredible age. I reckon it was an Amiga muncher.
An Amiga muncher. And frankly, it also should be informing our conservation. You might think that it's these fields here which are going to greatly benefit the swallows full of wildflowers with all of those terrestrial insects. But in fact, it could have been the flooding of those marshes on the other side of Wild Ken Hill which is boosting these birds' ability to get those essential nutrients. Top stuff. Now, the mission of our series is a vision for the future. That's a vision for us and for wildlife too. And Megan McCubbin has been out and about digging deep into a bog to see how there can be both a vision for wildlife and ourselves in certain, well, wet and boggy places.
This is the Fens and Wixel mosses. A nature reserve which straddles the border between England and Wales. Home to thousands of rare and important species, including the green hairstreak butterfly. The site covers 2,500 acres and is a wetland of special scientific interest.
I've got up super early this morning in the hope that I may just hear a very special sound. It's a sound which has been missing from these parts for over 3 decades, but it's back, and it's the sound of drumming. And the drumming, of course, belongs to the snipe. So far this morning I've heard cuckoo, which you can hear right now over there. I've heard robin, and there's lots of geese around, but no drumming yet.
Today, it's clear that this rare lowland peat bog is thriving, but that hasn't always been the case. In this acidic, waterlogged habitat, plant material becomes partly decomposed. And as it builds up over thousands of years, it's compressed to form peat. But as recently as 1990, the mosses here were drained and decimated, with the peat cut and used for fuel and garden compost.
I've always loved a bog.
It's a lovely squelchy sound.
You've got to love the squelch.
30 years ago, the mosses were transformed. And today, Ellie Williams from the Bog Life Project is continuing to help heal the scars of its industrial past, for the benefit of wildlife, but also the health of the planet.
From a climate change perspective, these are vital for storing carbon. Even just on this bog alone, we store 2 to 3 million tonnes, which is a vast amount that can be locked away for thousands of years. When a bog is drained or it's planted upon, that exposes that peat to the air, allowing it to oxidise and become carbon dioxide. So you're actually releasing that thousands of years worth of carbon into the atmosphere, which is a double reason as to why we should restore these bogs.
Incredibly, a healthy waterlogged bog can store more carbon acre for acre than a forest. And the secret to this habitat superpower lies with this, sphagnum moss.
Now, it might not look like much, but it can hold 20 times its own weight in water. I mean, creating a blanket just like this one, it locks in that rainfall, keeping the soil below nice and moist.
Now, a new method of keeping the bog in tip-top condition is being pioneered, and sphagnum moss is being planted to restore 9 acres of damaged peatland.
So we have to wiggle that in there.
Yeah, and just plug them in and compact around the edge.
It's quite simple, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, nice and simple,
That's
but
not
a lot
too
of them.
How many have you done so far?
So we've done 30,000 so far, and then we've got another 70,000 to go. So we've actually got 8 species of sphagnum here. So they took sphagnum from the site. They were grown at a lab and now ready to be planted. We want to get a biodiverse blanket if we can, so we're planting as many as possible.
As well as capturing carbon, these rejuvenated peatlands will benefit the many species that thrive here, like the snipe, whose ground nests are kept well hidden from predators.
But it also means that they've eluded me too. But luckily, there's still a lot more to see here.
Including the raft spider, who rests on the water's surface to feel for the vibrations of potential prey.
And the white-faced darter too, which is just over here. It's perfectly adapted, evolved to live amongst these bogs because they lay their eggs and the larvae develops in the sphagnum moss. And because of the acidity of the water, it means that there's no fish here, giving the larvae protection to grow. So it's imperative that we protect these type of habitats and even perhaps create more for years to come.
And as Megan said, it's imperative that we protect and restore bogs and not exploit them.
Certainly is. When the last State of Nature report was published, there was lots of bad news. Many of our principal habitats and species were in critical decline. And highest amongst them were some of our farmland habitats and species. Why is that? Well, it's because of the intensification of farming, industrial farming. Is there a way back? Well, of course there's a way back. We have the ability to restore and repair, and that's what's happening here at Wild Ken Hill. They are taking to the landscape and making significant improvements. A field here of Phacelia, that crop that you saw at the beginning of the programme, lovely and lilac, a cover crop. And here the field margins, about 10 metres in size. All of the hedgerows here are growing and flowering and blooming and bushing, which is fantastic. One of the groups that we've seen the most significant declines in the farmed environment are our moths. Massive declines in those moths, and they're so important to us. They're eaten by so many other animals. So the question is, of course, has all of this hard work here at Wild Ken Hill paid off?
Well, one way to find out is to put a moth trap out, and that's exactly what our team did last night. They put this moth trap out, and we got a fantastic amount of moths there. And this is what we got. We got 29 different species and hundreds, a couple of hundred individuals. It was the first time that Lloyd, the conservation manager, has put a moth trap out in the regenerative farming area. And he thought he'd probably get, a good handful. So he was amazed to see just how many he got and the variety. And you can see some of them here. They are spectacular looking. And so it just goes to show that the work that they've done in the last couple of years with regenerative farming has definitely made a difference.
And here are some more of those moths that they captured last night. We've got a pale tussock here. It's a beautiful animal. It's just warming up at the moment on the tip of my finger. And here over, we've got a swallow prominent. And their larvae, well, it's just been mating, I suppose, at this time of year, laying its eggs, and they'll be laying them onto the willows around here. Really beautiful. And of course, a fundamental part of the food chain. All sorts of things eat these. Birds, mammals, spiders, shrews. I mean, without moths, you're in big trouble. They're also important pollinators. And one fact is that, the blue tits that have been suffering so badly this year, well, we think that in the UK, collectively, every single year, the young blue tits eat 35 million caterpillars. Not all moth, butterfly as well, but 35 billion caterpillars every single year. That's how important these sorts of animals are in the food chain.
I've got one here. This is a great prominent, and I love this one, Chris, because you see, I don't know if you can see those legs, really furry legs, and they tend to spread them out in the front. It's a bit like the yoga pose, the child pose, the resting pose.
I'm unfamiliar with that.
I can just imagine.
If I'm very honest with you.
And the larvae, they feed on oak trees, so it's very important that they have farmland and oak trees, which is exactly what they've got here. Beautiful.
So these moths are clearly demonstrating that all the hard work at Wild Ken Hill is paying off, but what about the other animals? Well, our cameramen have been out and about filming them over the last couple of weeks. Have a look at this. Have a look at this beautiful suite of animals at this fabulous place. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And I hope you spotted the turtle dove in amongst that group of animals as well. A real jewel in the crown here.
Well, we've been focusing in on the detail of what's within a habitat, but let's zoom out to really look and enjoy the spectacular scenery that Yolo's in Scotland. Yolo.
Yes, you are right, Michaela. It is absolutely stunning up here. And do you know what? We haven't been fair to you at home. We've been neglecting you because one habitat we haven't shown you yet, and that is the high mountains behind me. It's a very important area. Now, we've had some stunning weather here this week, so we thought, why not send cameraman Raymond Bissant up there? And what he captured was just beautiful. Look at that, dawn up on the high tops. Those mountains can reach over 800 meters and 360-degree vista all around you there. Absolutely stunning. That's the only word you could use. And I'm pleased to say that while he was up there, Raymond did find some wildlife, and one of them was a real mountain specialist, the ptarmigan. This is a male ptarmigan. Tell that because the grey colour, white patches of course as well, and that red wattle above the eye there. Beautiful, beautiful bird, white in winter of course, and you can see why it's that colour. It blends in, and these birds, they're very unusual because they're very reluctant to fly. They run. They look like a running stone when you're up there on those high tops. Confined to the Highlands of Scotland because they're only found at above 600 metres above sea level, around 8,500 pairs. And you see that they got feathery feet. That, of course, is because of the cold weather. You get extreme cold weather up there, and you'll be pleased to hear that the Scottish midges are making an appearance here now as well. Now, we told you last week that there is a camera trap project going on here at Allerdale. And when the rangers checked one of the traps earlier this week, they came rushing over to us and said, you've got to have a look at this, because they too had captured one of the mountain specialists, a mountain hare. Now, this was taken over a period of 2 days, very different to when Raymond was up there, very misty. A lone mountain hare coming over and having a good look at the camera there, something new up on the mountain. Something that smelled a little bit different. Of course, it's our only native lagomorph. Rabbits and brown hares were introduced here. And again, in winter, they are white, but here we're seeing it in its summer coat of lovely golden brown colour. Beautiful, beautiful animals. There aren't many of them. There aren't many ptarmigan. There aren't that many mountain hares here either. So we're very lucky to capture that. And you might be worried now, how about Raymond? You didn't leave him on the mountain. No, we didn't. We went to get him, and on the way down, we came across another upland bird, this time the ring ouzel, also called the mountain blackbird. This is the male with that broad white bib across its chest. They use these fields. This one's feeding a fledgling, a recently fledged young. They like these rocky, heathery areas where they can nest. They also like these well-grazed upland fields where they can probe for earthworms, feeding here as well on caterpillars, of course, about 5,000 to 6,000 pairs here in the UK. 2 broods a year. They're summer visitors as well, these. So they arrive here around March time, and then they leave in early autumn to head down for the high Atlas Mountains in North Africa. It's a lovely bird, and I love going up on the hills, listening out for them. They have this 3-whistle, the call that they do. It's absolutely fantastic. And talking about ouzels, I need to introduce you to a special bird, super ouzel, if you like. Now, this male ring ouzel, it's been ringed as part of an RSPB study. It was ringed as a chick in Aberdeenshire in 2008. And over its lifetime, it helped to raise 58 chicks, and they reckon that it's travelled more than 44 1,000 miles, hence the name Super Ouzel. It was last seen in 2019, so unfortunately I don't think Super Ouzel is anymore, but 58 chicks, well, that is some going. Right, before the midges eat me alive, let's go back over to Northern Ireland and catch up with Gillian, and I'm quite worried about her because I think she's gone completely cuckoo.
Hopefully that is the unmistakable sound of a cuckoo, brought to you courtesy of this beautiful piece of clay artwork made right here at Castle Espy, and it's really special because it was made here a long, long time ago. Because Castle Espy wasn't always a reserve. Back in the 19th century, this whole area was a quarry, a limestone quarry. It was complete with kiln and brickworks. The whole area was gouged and tunneled and drained. But once the quarry was closed down, the water returned. And then, later on, once the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust took over the site in 1990, they shaped the site to create a whole variety of habitats, from freshwater lakes to salt marshes. And that cuckoo whistle is quite a fitting memento because during our time here in Northern Ireland, we've heard the occasional bird singing. In fact, earlier we sent a cameraman out to film curlews, and this is what he saw. So you can see the bird that we were after there, the curlew, in the tall grass and those beautiful flowers. But out in plain sight, there is a cuckoo. Now these, of course, are the famous brood parasites. They lay their eggs in the nests of other bird species. But they've also got another specialty as well. Now these birds actually go for insect prey that other bird species will actively avoid. And they'll go for things like hairy moth caterpillar. And the hairy moth caterpillar is covered in these irritating hairs or setae full of toxins. But the bird will snap off that head case, shake off that outer protective layer, and consume the insides. So quite incredible predatory behavior that we witnessed here, and it's not the only predatory behavior we witnessed at the reserve. Now, we've obviously been following the twists and turns, the trials and tribulations of Betty the black-headed gull. Now, the last time we showed you Betty, she had her 3 chicks. She was doing pretty well. I've got to say, we weren't sure all the chicks were hers. Some were. She may have adopted a few. It was quite hard to keep track with Betty, actually. But she was doing well. We were quite worried about Betty there because that nest was out on quite an exposed site. So the next time we caught up with Betty, disaster had clearly struck. Clearly there is no eggs, no chicks. That nest is empty now. And Betty herself looks very lost. She does these contact calls. Her maternal instinct clearly still strong, and she's really compelled to return to that nest, even though it's empty. And it's not just Betty that lost her brood. The other gulls in the background there's only 2 chicks left amongst the whole lot. So we caught up with the wardens here at the reserve to find out what happened. And they said that over the course of a few days, that little island colony was struck by a mass predation event, and the culprits were these birds, the great black-backed gulls. Now these are relative newcomers to the reserve, and they're an absolute tank of a species of gull. They're magnificent, but that large size means they're very difficult to fend off, especially for the black-headed gulls, which are very small and also quite naive, not used to defending themselves against these predators. So they didn't really stand a chance. And we do often say this on the watches, that yes, we wanted Betty to raise her brood to success, but the black-backed gulls have their chicks as well, and they have their broods to raise as well. So as we contemplate that and the whole cycle of life, there is one place that I like to go when I need to just take some time out and contemplate life a bit, and that's down to the coast. And that's exactly what James Appleton did when he headed to Lundy Island to capture one of our mindful moments.
beautiful sunset. Somehow I don't think we're going to get one of those tonight. It's a little bit grey. Now, you've got the whole weekend to watch the nests online, and there's loads of birds sitting on eggs. Which ones are going to hatch? Well, these are the ones to keep your eyes on. Keep your eye on the grey partridge. Because it's on 18 eggs, could hatch over the weekend.
Also the shell ducks. We don't know what's happening down in this burrow. They could hatch at any minute.
The sparrowhawk, spectacular bird, could hatch any time.
What about the lapwing? We think they're going to hatch. I'm going to put £1 on them hatching first, Michaela.
Oh, I'm going to put £1 on the skylark hatching first, because I reckon they're going to hatch at the weekend as well. So keep your eyes on all of those nests. We'll be back on Tuesday. This is what we've got coming up. We'll be here at Norfolk still, and we'll be at Wild Ken Hill to discover more about the return of the woodlarks.
And the kittens are back by popular demand. Yes, indeed, we'll be catching up with Allerdale's Wildcat Breeding Project.
And I'll be looking at some marvellous Mediterranean gulls right here at Castle Espy.
Yes, I think we've had a top week here. If you do want to keep up with those live cameras, you can find them on our website, and they're active from 10 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. If you're out and about this weekend and you see anything, we'd love to see it too. Do send it to us on all the usual platforms, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. But until that, we'll see you next Tuesday at 8 o'clock here on BBC Two. Good night.
Bye-bye.